So I'm here today to talk to you in more technical detail about RhoConnect. So RhoConnect is, those of you that have been doing mobile for a long time will think of RhoConnect as, oh, that's a sync server. Those of you that have been doing mobile for a while, it's been well accepted that you need to have a synchronization server so that your apps can use data even when they're offline. With RhoConnect, we've really tried to change the game in sync servers. We've tried to not just give you synchronized data, but actually in the process of getting that data down to your device, actually make it easier to write apps. So that was always been the goal. Make sync server, instead of this arcane black art, which is what it's always been, make it something truly easy. Really change the game. And so even though we said that and we would even talk about that, it was actually one of our partners, Paraveda, our Stephen Pillow or Collins in the room, so that pointed out to us, hey, we're using this on a lot of customer engagements, and we're really finding that it's just an easier way of doing things, and even if customers don't know that they need synchronized data or need offline data, it's just an easier way to do the app integration. So I'm going to try to emphasize that, and I hope you have that as a takeaway. Even if you're writing within the four walls apps where you believe, hey, I don't need synchronized data, I think that hopefully you'll feel at the end of this that we've truly made this whole process of integrating to back-end apps much easier. So with that said, this is the typical way that the sort of environment that RhoConnect will play in. We've talked a lot about RhoElements, and so RhoElements, you'll have an app, and as you saw in Rob's, I think most of you were in Rob's, whoa, why is that going into? I think most of you were in Rob's session where we talked about how to write a RhoElements app where you'll have controllers and you'll have views that you write as HTML templates. And so this is your whole picture of RhoElements. You then have the two ways to integrate to the back-end apps. You can either connect directly, and I think he showed an example of doing that, and that may be the way that most of you are doing it from your iOS apps, your Android apps. You're writing a bunch of code, you're connecting directly, you retrieve the data. Typically, you do need to put it in some kind of cache, so you'll parse through the data, you'll store the data, and then you'll use the data. And what we're seeing is in a lot of enterprise apps, especially enterprise apps, that's a large percentage of their app code. Typically, as long as you're using some kind of UI framework or styling library with Roads, you're not writing a lot of code to do the UI widgets. You can use most of that stuff out of the box. HTML is drastically reducing your UI. So if you do this, you're going to write a lot of your code there in doing this work. So we certainly support that within RhoElements. RhoConnect is not required. Every once in a while we'll have people say, oh, I'm not sure if I want to use this middleware server. I've got enough middleware floating around my enterprise. What we're saying is, that's fine, you can do that, and we support it. We actually do some things in RhoElements to even without RhoConnect to make it a little easier. But there's a different model where you say RhoConnect, I'll let RhoConnect handle getting the data from the back-end app stored down to the device on this object relational manager. And then we've actually reduced our app code because the app now, in your controller, you're writing code that then just retrieves from the ORM. So you're not doing any parsing, you're not doing any explicit connections to the back-end system. You just say, hey, I have some data in my ORM. And now you can make object calls like, asset.find or account.find or product.new in your inventory app to go and create and read that data. So yeah, as we mentioned, you can use this async HTTP library in RhoElements. If you choose that route, typically you are going to rewrite whatever web services that you have. You don't have to, it's not required. I get to see one of the fun things about my job, sort of the 30-second introduction to what I do. I used to be CEO of Roamable. That meant, about half my job was not particularly fun. About half of my job was working with developers, finding out what they needed, and then specifying the features that they needed, and saying how the product needed to evolve. And now that we're part of Motorola, that's all of my job. So my job is product manager for RhoElements and RhoConnect. I'm talking to you about RhoConnect today, but I also love to talk to you afterwards about your feedback about RhoElements. So in working with developers, and we're seeing a lot of these people, a lot of developers maybe that aren't even using RhoConnect, if they're using RhoElements to connect to that back-end system, whether they're using RhoElements for something else, if it's an existing back-end system and there's a SOAP web service or an XML web service, you're typically going to have to rewrite that to serve up JSON and REST to make these devices do a decent job of connecting to that back-end system in a reasonable period of time. It's not that it's not possible. There's actually it's becoming quite common. A lot of companies will sort of plan on, oh, okay, I've got to go rewrite my web services. You'll retrieve the payload. You'll parse it using JSON.parse. We even, remember I said we do some things that make it a little nicer in RhoElements, even if you don't use RhoConnect. We actually give you a super fast XML parser called RhoXML. It's syntactically identical to RexML, which is a Ruby library, but it's just super fast. It's optimized for mobile. So we want to help you do it if that's the path you choose. We also include in the async HTTP library. There are platforms that don't do asynchronous HTTP well, and we give you that. And then, of course, you'll store it in the database by looping through the records and performing the inserts. Okay, now all that said, we'll support you if that's the way you want to do it, but there is an easier way, and that easier way is RhoConnect. And so what that idea is that there's automatic synchronization. This actually results, I'll sometimes hear people say, hey, are Rho apps faster? Or are they slower? Is there a performance overhead? Oh, write once, run many, it's got to be slow. And what I say is a couple things. One is actually, this is not a RhoElements talk, so I won't go into details, but on Android it actually is faster due to the fact that we use the NDK, and as long as it'll actually be faster to do business logic than it would be with Android Java. But generally on most platforms it's essentially the same, but they actually appear faster. And the reason they appear faster, if you think about what you're spending, the time you're spending on those spinning wheels, what you're waiting for is data, right? You're going through the app, the guy clicks on a link, he's the field service guy, and he says, okay, I want to see all my tickets for today, right? And he's going to wait for that data to come down. In a well-designed app that uses RhoConnect, that data is already there because the synchronization is happening on a background thread. Now, by the way, it's the combination of RhoConnect plus designing it well, right? You have to think about taking people in a path through the app such that you are doing those synchronizations while they're looking at interesting, useful information. So you do have to design it well, but given that you're designing it well and you're using RhoConnect, your roamable app, if you will, that's at least the ones that are using RhoConnect should appear faster. Now, some of you will say, hey, wait a minute, I can just use some other synchronization. And the answer is true. Then it would be just as fast. What we see is our biggest competition is not the other sync servers, Sybase, Antenna, Worklight. Our biggest competition is people that try to hack out their own, and we could talk about that later, where people usually fall down hacking out their own, or just don't do it. Just never get to that point. Say, I'll do it later. And so what we're seeing is, for the most part, this is the difference between sync getting done or not. And if you do sync, you will not just have an app that's more functional because it works offline, but it will actually appear better. And of course, the programming model is much easier because now in your controllers, Rob was showing you his controllers there. Your controllers are not making SQL calls or data retrieval calls. It's just making ORM calls. So beyond that, the benefits of RhoConnect is easy backend integration, offline use. This is just reminiscent of sort of a quick highlighting of some of the bullets that Mark pointed out. It is more scalable because of the use of the NoSQL data. It's not because we're smarter. It's because we used a Redis database. We had second mover advantage, right? If you look at the other sync servers, they all rely upon a relational database, and that is the bottleneck. If you go and profile what it's doing, you can watch the spikes by process, and you'll see what's doing the work. It's that relational database server that's the bottleneck. We use Redis, and it's screaming fast. So I've talked to some of you out there that actually are doing competitive evals. Love to see your own measurements. We'll talk about futures for the next release. Our ad hoc anecdotal data is that we're much faster, but we're investing a lot in the next release in doing a very sophisticated 7-dimensional analysis of analyzing all the various performance parameters. It is a non-trivial effort, but it's the way to sort of show definitively, yes, this is definitely a much more scalable system. We also support things like a metadata framework. So we let you handle changing schemas to back-end systems. That's a key challenge that people have, is that every company's system is different. If you're an ISV, you're shipping. So if you're a partner, a Motorola partner, and you're shipping to an app to connect to somebody's back-end, maybe they're all using Salesforce or Siebel or SAP or whatever, and everybody's different, how do you handle that variation? So we give you a metadata framework that enables that to be easy to do. And it's even helpful in a given company, given that their schemas for their backends may change. And we support bringing this down to, by default, property bags, which means that as the schema changes and enhances, even without using metadata, nothing breaks. This has always been a problem and an issue in mobile software. I need to have my little iPhone prompt so I can always point to that. But this has always been an issue in mobile software, that unlike the web scenario where everything's connecting to a central server, in mobile software there's something running here on the edge. And it's always been an issue that as things change on the server, it breaks clients. And that's true if you have fixed schema. If you use a property bag, which is what we enable by default, you don't have that issue. As new attributes appear on the server, they can just get delivered to the client in this property bag model, which we use by default. And of course, we do support fixed schemas for other scenarios where property bag may not be as good, like large catalog databases. We also support conflict management in a very elegant, user-driven way. Instead of giving you a lot of policies, we let you hook in your own conflict management validation capability. So this is in more detail, the architecture, and what I want to highlight is a couple things that you may not be aware of here. The essence of it is, in order to make all this magic happen of getting from the back end down to your device, you write a source adapter. So that's the essence of it. And those of you that have worked with sync servers before, that should seem very familiar. Guess what? Everybody calls them source adapters. We didn't invent that term. But there's some other things to point out to you. First of all, we ship with some source adapters. We ship for most of the major popular CRMs, so Salesforce, Sugar CRM, Oracle, and Microsoft Dynamics. We don't ship with every object. I believe we do contacts, leads, accounts, tasks, and opportunities, because that's fairly common among the different CRMs. It's easy to look at what we ship and add more objects. And we will do more out-of-the-box stuff later, not as a major theme, and here's why. We would consider doing it in partnership with, we're not app developers, and going too far down the out-of-the-box source adapters is, we don't want to be, there's a lot of Motorola partners here, whether you're an SI or an ISV, we are your partner. We don't want to be removing your value. If you're shipping an app that works with Sugar CRM, we have people who have done that with Roamable, or Microsoft Dynamics or Siebel, we want you to make millions of dollars selling that app, and we never want to stand in the way. So we think of the source adapters as sort of like examples that people can then build upon. We would consider adding other source adapters, but let's take the example of SAP. We probably wouldn't try to do every object. We would do SAP field service items or timesheets, something to sort of show the way and provide a little bit of value to ease the integration, but we're not trying to ever be app developers. So we have that. We also have something that Lars will be going into in detail tomorrow, but and I'll talk a little bit about today, which is the ability to, instead of using source adapters where it's running on the server, actually have add-ins into your own apps that you've written. So you add the server plugin to, say, your Rails app or your Java app, and then that app becomes a synchronizing app. And we'll talk about some scenarios where that can be helpful. It's sort of a very unique way to slice this problem. Today we're going to spend most of the time talking about source adapters because they're always usable, whether it's your app or somebody else's. Server plugins you can only use when you're allowed to sort of modify the app or add a library. Source adapter, however, this is also very valuable because source adapters today we're saying, hey, do these in Ruby. It's a very powerful tool for the kinds of data transformations that you have to do. Here, though, these server plugins are written, first of all, you don't write them, but they're written in whatever language you normally work with. So Ruby, C# for .NET, Java, and by the way, you don't even have to look at the language, right? Because it's essentially written for you, but if you did need to extend it or modify it, it's in your environment. Another thing to emphasize is a lot of people think that RhoConnect is just for Rho elements or roads, which is the precursor of Rho elements. But we do support Objective-C, and we actually have several ISVs that have shipped Objective-C apps. Some of them might even be here today that use our Objective-C library. We support HTML JavaScript. Lars will be showing the server plugin from a PhoneGap app tomorrow. And we support Android Java as well. So we're totally committed to supporting whatever people need. We've even had people say, well, can you do it from Visual C++ for my Windows mobile app? I've tried to steer people to the JavaScript client for that, so definitely want to get your feedback, and you can let us know whether that works for that. The idea is that if we have a JavaScript client, that should work everywhere. So the first step in doing a RhoConnect app is you're going to generate a source adapter. So what I'm going to actually do is just jump in, and because I know we're going to be pressed for time, I'm going to jump in and do that generation. Yeah, I don't have RhoStudio up, just Xcode. So I'm going to fire up RhoStudio. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I want to create a new project, and I want to create a RhoConnect application, and we'll call this app forum. And let's look here. Okay, so we got app forum. So here is my basic app, and there's really not much that's interesting at this point. I haven't created any source adapters yet. You'll see there is an application class, and this is typically where I will do something such as hook into the company's LDAP to support integrated authentication, or hook into some other service to do that. But at this point, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I want to create a source adapter. So I'm going to say File, New, RhoConnect Source Adapter. And I'll create a source adapter called Product. Okay, so now I get a couple things generated. First of all, I can go to my sources directory, and I get this product source adapter. And then what I also get is I get a spec. So I get this, we're big believers in we don't force test-driven development on anybody, but we're big believers in test-driven development. So Rho Elements is the only framework that I know of that supports TDD with mspec. And then we have our specs here inside RhoConnect, which is where we can go and put tests in. So we can create a failing test for, say, query, and then add the code to the source adapter to make it work. So before we write any code, though, let's just look at what we have here with the source adapter. There's really 4 interesting methods: query, create, update, and delete. So the idea is by writing these 4 methods, all the magic happens. I just write those 4 methods, and everything else happens by default. And notice that there are a couple more methods. One is called sync. Notice there's no to-do there. And so what that means is, it turns out this is how you override how it's stored to the caching database on the server, which is Redis. So we can ignore that. There's no to-do. There's also a login and log off. What that says is, it's not strictly required. If you think about when you do a sync, you're creating and updating and deleting objects that are coming from the device, right? And you're querying stuff the other way. You probably don't, there's probably a login call to your back end that's shared in between what you do for query and create and update and delete. So login helps to put that common login code. It's not required. If your backend doesn't require login, you don't have to put it in. Or if you just say, I don't care about that efficiency, I want to do the login every time. But if you have an authenticated backend, now this is different than authenticating with RhoConnect itself, but if RhoConnect has to authenticate to the backend, you should put that common login in the login method. Now, what I want to do is write a quick source adapter that works with a theoretical backend. This is going to be a simple REST JSON backend. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this thing called rostore.heroku.com. This is if you've ever done our tutorials, you've probably seen this site. It's a tiny little Rails app. Sorry, yep. It's a tiny little Rails app that I wrote on Heroku many years ago. It's the world's simplest thing, but has gotten quite a bit of usage. So this is the JSON feed. And by the way, if we just go here, you can see it's a little tiny Rails app. But one of the nice things about Rails is typically, like if we go to products, there'll be to get the list as a JSON feed, you should just say .json. But this could be any URL, but it's just giving me a JSON feed. And think of this as, hey, I just have some XML feed or JSON feed, and now I want to connect to it. So what we want to do is we want to write code that's going to go out, grab all this data, parse it, and luckily we're not going to have to worry about sticking in a database or do anything else. We're just grabbing it, parsing it, and putting it into a canonical format. Now, what is that canonical format? Does anybody know? Quick quiz. What is the canonical format that RhoConnect says, take your data from anything in the cloud and put it into the magic format? What is that magic format? Hash of hashes, right? RhoConnect says everything in the world can be turned into a hash of hashes. So what is a hash of hashes? It's an associative array of associative arrays. So here's a simple hash of hashes. It says that everything's uniquely indexed by, some unique index. It doesn't have to be a number. It could be anything. Just it's got to be unique. And that's its key. And then the values is another hash that has another set of key value pairs. Is that oversimplifying it? Let's put it this way. I've yet to see the thing that can't be expressed as a hash of hashes. Does that mean it's the natural format for everything? No. You can obviously have things that are more hierarchical, and you will hit that. You'll hit all kinds of nasty stuff up in the cloud that you want to turn into this canonical format. But I've never seen anything that can't be turned into that. And the beauty is, once you get into that canonical hash of hashes format, then we take care of the rest for you. The whole thing of like serializing it over the wire and doing it efficiently and sending just the changes and putting it into a database, all of that's handled. So let's go ahead and write this. We can go ahead and delete this little note now. And we should remove the raise exceptions, right? Because that means if we forget to write it, the RhoConnect is going to give us a nice friendly error message that says, hey, you didn't give me a query method. So I'm going to do a couple things first before I write this. First of all, so that's where we talked about what we're generating. We're generating the sources adapter name. there is that settings YAML, which I didn't show yet, but it has some options, like how often you query. That's the basic structure of a source adapter. It says to put some gems in, require to handle back-end data sources. Now, I've said Ruby's really good at this data munging thing. One of the reasons is the first-class nature of a hash. A hash is in Ruby as a language. Guess what? You don't have that in JavaScript. You don't have that in Java. You don't have the ability to deal with it, excuse me, not JavaScript, in Java. You don't have the ability to say, here's this language. You have to create like a hash table object. So, I mean, it's not that it's that hard to work with. But once you start looking at the operations that you have on hashes and arrays, then you start to say, wow, there's really a lot of the stuff out of the box. Now, one of the things out of the box is interesting, useful libraries for just about everything. So these are some of the most valuable gems, so to speak. Sorry, that's my one bad pun for the afternoon. The first one is require JSON to handle JSON payloads. Another one is XML simple. I'm hoping to have time to show integration with Google Docs through XML. I'm guessing maybe not. Require open URI as if you want to directly connect to just a URL. Just go connect to a URL and get just a stream back. REST client is when you know you're dealing with a REST client. I'm not going to integrate with this RhoStore thing with REST client because it's actually making it so easy. It's not showing an interesting example. If you really got a REST compliant client, you probably would use REST client. The sample store app, we use REST client in there. And that just says it does the connection, assumes it's REST, and makes all these simplifying assumptions. And so you're not like grabbing the data and taking it apart. And then there's Savon for SOAP. There's also Nokogiri for large amounts of XML data. So if you can't use REST, if you can't use, say, if it's not SOAP, so you're not using Savon, and it's a large stream of XML data, XML simple can be a little too slow, but XML simple is a beautifully simple API. Okay, so now we're dealing with JSON. I'm not going to use REST client, even though I could, because I want to make it more interesting. I'm going to use OpenURI. So I'm going to go back to here, and let's go in here and say, now what I really should do is perhaps, given that Rob was dealing with demo gods, is just go to github.com roamable store server, and this is all there, but it's sort of fun to code without a net. So require OpenURI and then require JSON. And so I'm going to say URI equals rostore.heroku.com/products.json. It's also a good way to sort of make sure you're stepping through every line of code. So this is what we're going to connect to, and then we're going to say response is open URI.read, right? That's our raw feed that we're getting back, and now we want to parse that with JSON.parse. So we're going to say something like items equals JSON.parse response. LogNet, huh? Oh, does that mean I'm timed out? Eesh, that's not good. So items.each do item. And now I'm getting this stuff back, and I want to get it into this canonical format, right? So I have to have some idea of like how I'm getting this back. So I think it's going to be something like this. First of all, remember, it's hash of hashes, and the hash of hashes is returned in @result. So here's the empty hash, right? And now I'm going to say @result. And I just need a unique field, so let's go look at this. And it looks like it's got this like unnecessary level of nesting where it says product next to everything. So product, and then so I'll have to say item, product, and then I have to get a unique ID out of that big stream. Looks like there's ID and there's SKU. even created activity uses, anything that's unique. So I'll say ID. So I'm going to say item, product, ID, and then on the right side is item product. Okay, so no, it's not items because this is our iterator. I could say I in here if I wanted to. But that looks pretty good. Am I missing anything? One, two. No. There's. I think this is going to work. So, as long as I have a network connection. So, let's talk about how we test this. So, first, what we want to do is I'm going to go down and I'm going to write the failing test. And what I'm actually going to do is, let's see if we're going to get this, oh wow, it's working. Okay, I'm actually going to I'm going to crib this failing test from, I didn't crib the working code, but I want to see what we put in as a test there. So if I go to store server, here's store server, and there's a spec in here, and the spec for product, we said, it looks like it actually did a create and made sure that it was of a certain size or not. I'm actually just going to take this test query size should be greater than 0, and this is just some artifacts that you always get within our spec. So I like that, makes sense, and no errors. Yeah, that makes sense. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the product spec, and I'm going to say that. Test query size should be greater than 0, and the errors is blank. And notice that it just says pending for create, update, and delete. And what this is going to do is it'll leave that as yellow, because it just says I don't have a test. It doesn't say it failed. But I just want to test this one thing. And this is going to be an easier way of testing than going and like writing a sync client. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Documents, Workspace, App Forum. Yeah, okay. And I'm going to say rake Redis start. I'm starting the Redis database. I don't have to really worry about it beyond that. And now I'm going to say rake RhoConnect spec. And it failed. Let's see what it's failing on. Oh, did I put my requires in properly? We'll see what it says. Spec helper, let's see. Oh, okay. So it actually failed on, please provide some code to read records from the, oh, did I actually leave that in there? Oh, I forgot to save it. That will generally do it. Okay, so it's doing exactly what it should do, which is saying I don't have any code and you didn't provide any. So I actually didn't do a save. And so now I can do rake RhoConnect spec. And it works. Sweet. Wow. So this is actually working. So before I jump on and I'm going to show you how you can test this from an actual app is what we're doing. This is what we wrote to make synchronization. What this is doing is it's going out, grabbing the data from this little back end, getting the hash of hashes, and then RhoConnect stores it in the Redis database. And it's actually ready for millions of clients to start hitting it and requesting data, and it's going to keep track of all the data they have and the data they don't have. And what we'll actually do is it will give them this data, which is the same as this data, which has all kinds of junk in it because it's in our tutorials, and we clear it out every once in a while, but people fill it up with more junk. So, is this making sense so far? Any questions about what we've done so far? Those of you that have done, maybe the way to do is do it by exception. Those of you that have done sync projects, does this seem easier? Does this seem harder? Does anybody think? Okay, cool. So the goal here, sorry? All right, we'll try it. It's all free to download and try. So, okay. So now, I'm going to test it from an app, right? So let's just write an app. Which is also in a way too easy to be true, but you guys already know that because many of you have used RhoElements. So we're going to call this app forum client. Okay, so now I'm in app forum client. Oh, no, I'm not. Yep, good way to catch me. Thank you, Jim. Okay, so I'm in app forum client, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a roads model. So I'm going to say new. It's quite tricky using this lectern to write code. Okay, so I'm going to say new roads model, and I'm going to say product, and every product has a brand, a name, a price, and a quantity. Okay, and now what I want to do is provide a link to this, so I'll call this like product inventory. Now, by the way, I could do the compile at this point, and I'm going to have a functioning product app that does all the full crud, but that's sort of cool in and of itself that you have all this automatic scaffolding, but that's a demo for another session. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go move on from there, and I'm just going to enable sync. So there's two things that you need to do to enable sync. Can anybody tell me what those two things are? Just two steps. Come on, I know there's some of you. Come on. Partners at back there. There's two key steps. Somebody call it out. I've forgotten. So, yeah, so we set the sync server exactly. Makes sense, right? It's got to know where this thing is. Now, what's cool is if we have RhoHub, RhoHub will actually set up a sync server for you, right? So it'll give you a URL. You just say deploy. I could say I want to deploy this to RhoHub, and it'll give me a URL back, and I could type that in. Or I could just use, for now, I can use my local thing. And my local thing will just work like this. So it's giving this to me in a comment, and I just type this in. Okay. So that's sync server. And the other thing is we need to enable the model for sync. So let's go to the model, and we just do this. At some point, we've got some of my engineers back here. I'm convinced that it's probably better just having everything automatically enabled for sync, and it wouldn't be so bad. Probably add some little bit of overhead, but anyway, so we've enabled it for sync. We'd sell more RhoConnect servers. So that and that should be it. So now I should just be able to say run configurations. This is an eclipsism that you have to pick the app forum client, and we'll say Android RhoSimulator. So here's inventory. Now, this link works. I can create products by hand, and they'll be stored, and that's sort of cool. It's just the basic road scaffolding stuff. But I should be able to log in. Ah, no. I have to make my sync server run. I knew I was missing a step. So now what I want to do is say rake RhoConnect start. So that's running now. And it's running on 9292. So I didn't do any, remember I didn't write anything in that authenticate method. So I could write a little bit of LDAP code. I'm going to show you that code in a minute. I would check that against your LDAP or whatever you want. So this is just going to work, right? Because I don't know if you saw that code, it just said true, which means you're in. So now, let's do this. We really should have reset the database. I think I did things in the wrong order there, but let's go back here, log out. Let's reset the database. And let's log in. Okay, well, let's see. Am I getting any errors here? Ah. Oh ho ho. Yes, this is actually really cool. Ha ha. It's actually working really well. Anybody guess what the error is? It did exactly what it was supposed to do. What did I do before I tested it? I created a record. So it went and said, hey, you didn't give me a method to go create a record. So it shouldn't do that now, because I just reset the database. It's completely empty. And it's just synced. Cool. So it did exactly what it was supposed to do. And it actually synced the data. This is all the stuff from the server. And the first time, now I can go in, create a create method, and if I had done that to start, you know, it would have said, okay, you know, I've created something for you. You don't want it to, you know, not do the create and just do the query. Like, you have to have a logically consistent set of operations. If your app expects to support create, you know, your backend should support create. So that's it. That's the basic REST JSON stuff working. So, talked about the query method. We talked about the valuable gems. We demonstrated this. If you want to look at it more, you can look at github.com Rumble store server. I didn't use that for two reasons. One is it's much more exciting to code without a net. And the second one, though, is I like to show it with OpenURI because that's the more general case, right? Who knows what kooky format you have out there? This sample, the store sample, uses REST client to make it even simpler. You were saying it seems too simple. This was pretty simple. This example, though, is even simpler because it says as long as it's a standardized REST backend, I'm going to do even more work for you. Okay, so another example is from the demo XML adapter. I'm thinking I'm not going to have time to get into this. This is a lab that I wrote that's available to all of you at bit.ly/RhoTraining. There's that doc file is out there. We will be supplying the slides after this, but you can go to bit.ly RhoTraining, and Lab 6 does this. I think it's a very, if I do say so, I think it's a compelling example of connecting to a complex XML feed backend, specifically Google Docs. And it's actually a lab that helps you build your own issue tracker with a Google Docs backend, all using RhoConnect and RhoElements. So check it out. I think it's a good example of sort of the power of it, but also dealing with sort of nastiness. This is a very simple, clean backend. Google Docs is a wonderful product, but their API is just, it's horrible. And so it's dealing with that nastiness. So testing your source adapters, we showed this. I did rake RhoConnect start, but we now have the ability to do things with these simpler commands as well. I just have these old instincts where I like to use rake, and I think that way. But you can also say RhoConnect start, RhoConnect spec, RhoConnect detach install. if you're bundling up your app. You saw that we scaffold generated the RhoElements app. We enabled the model for sync. We set the sync server parameter in RhoConfig.txt. You can also use stuff with SOAP. This is another just simple example if you just want a quick SOAP feed. If this is a longer class, I would show this. This is a U.S. Department of Interior SOAP feed, and this code would allow you to read it. I had a question the other day about support for SQL. And it's interesting. We usually recommend putting a web service on top of it, but we're getting more and more requests for, hey, I just want to go directly against the database. And the answer is, well, can you do that? The answer is theoretically yes. This code, and who knows, maybe we've never bundled it with a product because we felt that was an implicit endorsement of directly connecting to databases. I still say you should probably slap some quick web service on top of it, but this code should work against really any particular SQL table. And this is showing how generic the issue is, right? You're taking a SQL result set and mapping it to a hash of hashes. So you should be able to go against this backend. This is actually code to connect to SQL Server, which is a product I spent six years of my life on many, many years ago. And we're getting it from a parameterized table, but then we're going through here and using, this is Ruby DBI, which gives you a really nice interface to SQL. We're going through here and grabbing the column names and then going through the rows that we get back and looping through and setting our @result to be empty and then looping through and setting up the key value pairs, right? By doing @result row 0. I make a simplifying assumption that your key field is the 0th column. You don't have to do it that way. Obviously, you could write a little more code if you knew what the key field was. But with that simplifying assumption, this little code fragment should work to synchronize any SQL table. So authentication, everybody always says, well, how do I authenticate with my LDAP? We have this in the doc, but you would just say required net/LDAP, which is yet another useful Ruby gem. And then you write this small amount of code that takes, the general problem is to take the username and password that you get and and then authenticate it and then return, return success or return non-false, return true if it works and return false otherwise. And so obviously it'll change depending on whatever it is that you're connecting with. So I want to talk a little bit about push sync, and part of this is to set this up for Lars's discussion of server plugins later. It's the following idea. It's always better if you can do push sync. So, and you saw what we did just there. We said, okay, I want to sync. Or we logged in and it actually automatically did a sync. And that works. And it turns out there's a polling interval by default where it will go and re-poll. What you really want to happen is something interesting happens on the back end, and you just want that data to just appear on the device. And that's always a better way. It means you're not polling, you're not draining battery life, and you get this near real-time data. It's just an awesome, awesome user experience. And it's generally very difficult to set up with competing sync servers. In fact, in most roll-your-own sync servers that I've seen don't even do it. The only successful roll-your-own push sync that I've seen that really looks good is an app called Grocery Gadget, of all things. And it's a fantastic app. We actually briefed the guy. He just wrote in and wanted a briefing, and I said, oh, did you use our stuff? He said, no. And his app's amazing. Like, you can be walking with your wife to the supermarket, and you're seeing like push updates where the status of what got bought was changed. Amazing stuff. But he said he spent most of the work on this beautiful app making push sync work because it was so hard to do. It's always better if you can do it. It does require that your back end have the callbacks, though. That's the key thing. Whatever you're integrating with has to have a way that you can register and say, tell me when these interesting things happen. So that's where, so this is the code that you would register to say, hey, call this code, and then RhoConnect exposes this REST client. So this is something you would call from your back end to call to the the server ping operations and give it these parameters, which tells RhoConnect to go and basically ping the client, which tells it to wake up and go grab data. So that's really what it all hinges on. So this is an example of calling from your back-end app with Ruby, but there's equivalent examples from Java or .NET. But so here's what I'm getting at. You got your Roads app, you got RhoConnect, you have a back-end app. Now, if you have a way to register calls in the back-end, you could put this ping thing registered with the back-end. So if you're using some enterprise back-end that has callbacks, you're fine. The problem is some enterprise apps don't have callbacks, and some apps that you may have done might not have that mechanism. So this is where server plugins come in. Server plugins not only do the thing where you don't have to write the source adapter, right? But they're expecting to do callbacks when there's new data, right? Creates, updates, and deletes. They're expecting to do the callback. So if you don't have a callback mechanism, some way of your back-end app sending stuff back, this is providing one for you. And we have flavors for Java and for Ruby and for .NET. So definitely attend Lars's talk if you're interested in that, if you're allowed to change your back-end app. And you are using one of those 3 development environments. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is RhoConnect, and I'll try to wrap up briefly. Promise I'll take less than the total hour that I started at. So for RhoConnect 3.3, we're timing it to align with Rho Elements 2.1, which we're trying to make. 2.0 is recently out. We're trying to make Rho Elements 2.1 more like a less than a 3-month release, so late summer. And we're lining up RhoConnect 3.3 for that. And here's the key themes. Is analytics. So what we are doing is we're doing a lot of our own testing. This means our analytics. We'll talk later about we want more analytics that you can do and use for your own operations, not just sync, but your usage. So what we're doing is we're looking at this 7-dimensional space of varying the number of devices of your app. So you're going to be somewhere in this 7-dimension space, right? Number of devices, numbers of objects that you're syncing with, numbers of attributes, how wide are those objects? Number of syncs, how often do people sync every day? How often do people do updates? What's the speed of your back-end system? What's the speed of the network to the device? It's amazing, and there's a lot there. And we'll get multiple data points in each one of those dimensions. And so we're going to get high, medium, and low, realistic values for each one of the 3 dimensions. So that's 3 to the 7th power, which is in the thousands. And obviously we'll use that framework and continue to expand what we have in that space. And this is mostly so we can start to give you recommendations for what you'll need here. Server RAM, CPU speed, numbers of servers, but we're even going to include that. So if you actually look at it and you add number of servers, you've really got 10 dimensions that we're exploring. But the biggest output is so that we can give you sizing guidelines. Now we have some sizing guidelines today, and it's not like they're not working. You can talk to the guys from Parveda. They've got several successful deployments, and on generic hardware, it actually works quite well. I just wanted to give you, it is a consistent theme that we've gotten, especially from partners. I just want to be able to speak intelligently about how to deploy this stuff and what the sizing guidelines are. So I'm telling you 2 things. One is we're taking it really seriously. We're spending a lot of engineering on it, and also making you understand the size of the problem, if you will. So the other thing is we're introducing a new REST API, so you should pay attention to that, because that will be so you saw one of the REST APIs is like you could call the server to tell it to go ping. You can drive what RhoConnect does programmatically through REST. So we're modifying that. We're still support the old one, but we're introducing a new one. We're going to make it faster for certain types of updates. There have been some scenarios where even though it scales really well, the individual retrieves of objects can take some time. So we're optimizing the way that we store entire objects in the Redis database. We're making enhancements to bulk sync. Those of you that are using bulk sync today, we didn't support bulk sync of blobs. So like if you have catalogs with big images, the problem is we always put blobs in the file system, so it's a little weird, because you're doing bulk sync, we're creating a database, but then remember the blobs aren't even really in the database. So it's a bit of a tricky problem, but we listen to our customers and we've had several requests. So we're doing bulk sync of blobs and then the ability to selectively bulk sync. We had the ability to turn bulk sync off, so it's not like you're stuck today, but we're adding the ability to just not even do that first bulk sync, and you could say, no, bulk sync this model, but not this model. By the way, bulk sync is the thing where we actually, if you're sending a huge amount of data, we'll actually formulate the database and push an entire SQLite database down. So it makes a super fast data delivery. And then we're actually introducing our own push and notification service. So those of you that are Motorola, it's like, why is this so critical? Because today we use Android cloud-to-device messaging and we use iOS push. So why would we want to have our own service? Any guesses why? So two reasons. One is we do a lot of, at Motorola, we do a lot of behind the firewall private LAN installations, and you can't get to Android cloud-to-device messaging service. And there's no way somebody's going to take this device and say, okay, I'm going to go sign up for a Gmail account. It's a non-starter. So we'll have our own service. It's very much like cloud-to-device messaging, very reminiscent. It was done by the CTO's office. Is Phil here? Awesome. So thank you very much. It's a huge part of our value proposition. I've actually had a customer tell me it's a justification to raise prices because Sybase actually charges separately for, as you know, for using their own push capability. They basically have a separate messaging server, but I don't think we'll do that regardless. And then of course Windows Mobile and Windows CE. There is no push for Windows Mobile and Windows CE, so this gives us that as well. And we will do clients for other OSs as well. So RhoConnect 4.0, more of a longer term, and that's somewhere within the next 9 months to a year or so. But some of the bigger things that we're doing are transactional support. Now, what does that mean? That means basically, say I have multiple sources that I'm syncing, and you want to say it's master detail things or associated objects, maybe products and incident reports on the products. If you say, I don't want to get the products and not get the incident reports, or get the incident reports and not get the products, you can say, these are all related objects and they either all sync or they don't sync. Because you don't want to be in a mode where, not all the incident reports came in, so you think a product didn't have any incident reports associated with it. Or you had a bad purchase order because you don't have the line items. So it either all works or none does, and then reporting it back to transactional managers. Other thing is writing source adapters in JavaScript. I've told you that Ruby is like an awesome power tool for writing these source adapters, and it is, but we're not religious. We're not like the mobile Ruby company, right? We're not religious about this stuff, so if you want to write source adapters in JavaScript, we want to support you. In addition to, of course, letting you write server plugins, that don't run on the server for the back end in whatever language you want. We want to get you to true zero-code server plugins. So Lars is going to show you the RhoConnect RB, which is very elegant. It's just, you tweak a few knobs and you're good to go. On the other ones, there's a little bit more code in RhoConnect.net that you have to write, but we'll get there. The other thing is once we have your push service, Phil, and that's shipping inside RhoConnect, and we use RhoHub where we host stuff, we can make it much easier to build push. So it's already easier than other ways of doing push sync. We can make it even easier because we can do things like have server plugins that assume that there's a hosted notification service and are already by default coded to talk to it. We want to support end-to-end testability inside RhoStudio. You saw me drop down to do a couple things like run my specs from the command line. You should be able to do that from RhoStudio. And we want to provide more out-of-the-box source adapters. So My apologies for running over time. I'll turn it over to the next speaker and look forward to hearing from you soon.